When you think about a reference in a Fromsoftware game, the first thing that comes to your mind is most likely Berserk. And that's because we are psychologically terrorized by the sheer amount of videos, reels, shorts and TikToks that like to point out the fact that this thing in this video game looks like this thing in this manga and repeat the process 1,000 times. What most people tend to overlook is the personally more interesting references and source of inspirations that, while not having the same impact of Berserk inside the company, still shaped some of the most iconic characters, locations, designs and imagery of Fromsoftware games. Obviously, I didn't come up with these references out of nowhere, and they are not my own. They are a collection of weird similarities catched from the community through the years, with some confirmed from interviews and some still unconfirmed. Godric is the most devious, coward, pathetic and miserable character in Elden Ring, but also a possible hint to a book from 1651 named Leviathan, a work of social and authoritarian political theory by the philosopher and political theorist Thomas Hobbes. This similarity is found between Godric's monarchic authoritarian nature and its character design. Hobbes imagines the perfect kingdom as a being with a body made of his citizens and the head being the king. Godric grafts its follower body onto him in order to gain power and ascend to greater heights, with the only thing remaining of himself being the head. But the final outcome is more body horror fueled rather than powerful. Fromsoftware gets a lot from real-life architecture when it comes to creating their environments. You have, for example, Faro Mazzulla structures that have a lot of assets that are identical to Pisa's Piazza dei Miracoli, that being Malikev Arena, and the Pisa's Baptistery or the Leaning Towers that are found everywhere in Faro Mazzulla. You also have the notorious Anor Londo being Milan's Dome. You have Visalif and Aztec architecture like Angkor Wat, and you also have Armored Core 6 that, while it doesn't reference any architecture in particular, it does have an Eastern Europe brutalesque style in a lot of its megastructures. I always love when names in world building follow a reasonable pattern. For example, in Lordran we have Londo, used in both Anor Londo and New Londo, probably meaning city or something on that line, just like New York or York. While Anor, being constantly lighted by its fake sun, actually means sun in Tolkien's Elvish language, making Anor Londo the city of sun, or something like that. Aigon is a weird character that every time he speaks, it straight up jumps you into mid-800s literature.
Curse you, Baal! I hereby vow you will rue this day. Behold, a true Drake!
Probably because he comes from mid-800s literature. Aigon and Baal have these odd similarities with Captain Ahab and Moby Dick from the 1850s novel by Melville. Moby Dick and Baal are both giant monsters that are being hunted from hopelessly inferior humans in search of revenge. And Captain Ahab and Aigon both use harpoons to hunt it down, both are challenging impossible odds, and both inevitably die from the monster that they're hunting down. Other than being the start of the weird self-reference kink of software DLCs, at the start of Artorias of the Beast we find ourselves in Ulasil, being greeted by a charismatic talking mushroom that desperately needs our help to save the princess of the kingdom from a scary monster. Duke's Archives staircases and have a lot in common with Harry Potter Hogwarts staircases, that being the fact that they both move. That's it. Elianthus is the name of the Armored Core 6 bone wheels, and it's also the name of the species of the sunflower, with the enemies in fact looking like sunflowers. Darkroot Garden in Dark Souls 1 as a whole, it's really mesmerizing and it really makes you feel like you've just taken 10 pills of whatever heavy drug comes to your mind, and you also have a talking cat. You know what also feels like a mushroom trip and as a talking cat? Alice in Wonderland. While never officially stated, there's this 2001 movie called The Brotherhood of the Wolf that most likely served as a direct source of inspiration from the Hunter's Robes of Bloodborne. A more subtle and very researched reference comes from the Ringed City, more specifically Fëanor's eggs. As a whole, this sequence after reaching Fëanor is really weird and nothing gets ever really answered about your interaction with Gwyn's hidden daughter and what did she need the heck for, but one cool connection the community was able to make is with the 1980s animated movie by Mamoru Oshii, Angel's Egg. Being extremely notorious for its open to interpretation nature, the whole movie is involved around this girl being weird and carrying this egg around for no reason whatsoever. I don't know if this can have anything to do with Fëanor, but the similarities are there for sure. Bloodborne as a world wouldn't exist if it wasn't for H.P. Lovecraft work, but other than being inspired by the genre created by Lovecraft, it does also include very direct references and nods to specific Lovecraft tropes. One being the Shadow over Innsmouth, direct source of inspiration from what ended up being the fishing hamlet, both having inhabitants of these seaport villages connected to some cosmic horror sea entity. When I talked about Ulasil, I said that Fromsoftware had a sort of self-referential kink, and that's true. They also like to foreshadow the next game in DLCs and a bunch of other stuff. But one self-reference that I haven't seen anyone talk about is from Kwon, a 2004 survival horror made by Fromsoftware that has the same body horror fucked up centipedes that come out of dead bodies, just like in Sekiro. And the reason I haven't seen anyone talk about it, it's probably because nobody gave a shit about Kwon. Dark Souls 1 Crystal Ring Shield already looks cool by itself, but it gets cooler the moment you randomly connect its weapon art to Ultraman's signature move, I guess. Soul's armor design is always on point, with how I imagine armors in a dark fantasy setting to be like, and it may surprise you to know that some of these armor sets aren't fantasy at all. For example, Dmnal of Xena, shopkeeper from Dark Souls 1, has an helmet that is literally the same helmet as King Aerith 8. Probably the most unfunctional piece of armor in history, that was obviously only made to be worn for spectacle. And Fromsoftware ended up with his helmet not because they wanted to reference it, but because they were looking to make Dnal have glasses on top of it, to reflect the character's personality and interest for rare trading objects. Miyazaki recalls in an interview that the initial source of inspiration for Kelak design came from an old board game named Dragon Pass, and how this unit, called the Crab Spider, had a character design that really stuck with him. The weird, almost out of place kick from the mimics in Dark Souls, it's actually the Super Tiger's Rolling Sobat, which is a move that originates from Japanese pro wrestling scene. Apparently, Sieglind of Katerina, the daughter of Sigmaier, looked like Emma Watson at some point in development. Miyazaki specifically asked the character designer to make her look like Hermione, and while that didn't happen since she never takes off her helmet, Fromsoftware designers envisioned a beautiful man and a beautiful woman to emerge from Katarina's armors. The unalloyed golden needle from Elden Ring serves the purpose of healing Scarlet Rot and the Frenzied Flame, and while being clearly inspired by the acupuncture technique, it may also reference the golden needle from Final Fantasy that also yields a status effect, that being the petrification. Lucatiel of Mirra, one of the good things to come out of Dark Souls 2, was actually at some point during her development confirmed to serve as a reference for the great novel of Don Quixote. Reference sadly only remained in the medieval Spanish design of her appearance. I probably only covered 5% of the amount of inspirations and references that are found in these video games, but still I hope that you close this video with at least one cool detail that you hadn't heard of beforehand, and if that's the case, consider leaving a comment, a like, whatever you want, and see you in the next one.